We were sitting around after the day's work on Friday in the local dive we called our bar. The four of us were listening to Bill Chapman explain again how he had just discovered his wife of 25 years had had an affair a while back. The other three offered him their support and repeatedly pointed out the cost of a divorce if he decided to go that route. We had all been lifelong friends, and I was invited into their group shortly after arriving in their small town. All five of us had served in the Marines, and I had come to the town of SPM on the coast after throwing a dart at a map on the wall over 10 years ago. Upon my arrival, using a newly formed offshore LLC, I bought out the only grocery store for miles and expanded it. SPM back then was a logging town with a village population around 1,000. The nearest town was more than a half-hour away. Within a year, I built up the business, got it licensed to carry alcoholic beverages, and tripled its size. The gas bar came later, and the store carried all the basics. I now had 8 full-time staff and 6 part-time. It took me a year before starting to build a log home on a section of land I bought from a tax sale on the outskirts of town. My 4 friends spent hours helping me design it. Thanks to their work at the mill, I was able to buy the raw logs to bark directly at wholesale prices, saving a ton of money. As a result, I now had a 3-bedroom log home that overlooked the village and the coast. The only problem they had with me was that, as far as they knew, I had never married and had never dated since my arrival. The rumor mill labeled me as a private individual, though no one had ever seen me make a pass at anyone. The womenfolk respected me, but soon learned I was a bachelor and would remain so. I was someone that all could trust, and they did. Everybody had a lot of questions about me, but learned I was a private man who wouldn't disclose much about my past. I had set up the LLC so that the company paid all the taxes. Anything I took out for personal use came from retained equity, so when I filed my personal taxes, it showed no income. I paid for everything in cash or by debit card and didn't even own a personal credit card. The only difference was that I went by my second name instead of my first. The sign at the entrance to our village said, "Next stop Japan." No one knew I had come from the state of New York to the Washington coast because of my past. I often wondered what kind of person would name a place SPM. After the second beer, we broke it up because Bill's eldest son was arriving home from university that night, bringing with him his fiancée. Bill's wife had gone to Seattle to pick them up, and we were all invited over for a barbecue on Saturday to celebrate his graduation and engagement. Bill wanted to be sober and waiting when they got there. After all, he didn't want his future daughter-in-law thinking he was just the town drunk. Stephen had been hired by one of the biggest investment firms in New York, so we all knew just how proud Bill was. I was the last to arrive as usual, fearing that one of my friends' wives would have brought someone along in their ongoing attempts to set me up. They treated it as a game because they were dying to know whether I was straight or not, and their curiosity only fueled the rumors. Connie, Bill's wife, saw me drive up in my old restored Ford truck, which I considered my pride and joy. "You've got to meet Stephen's girlfriend," she said. "She's a redhead. Jennifer is 22 years old and has 2 sisters and 3 brothers. I was struck by her the moment I met her. One look at her made it clear she was someone you wanted to know. I wanted to warn you because we both know that when you see a redhead, you tend to get quiet and distant. I have often wondered if it was a redhead who scared you in the past, but I don't know because you won't open up about anything. Grab a cold beer before joining us in the backyard." After grabbing a cold bud, I headed out to their backyard to discover the whole crew was there with all their kids and a few extras. Stephen saw me and ran over to give me a big hug, thanking me again for the 100th time for covering the cost of his education. He led me into the crowd to introduce me to his girlfriend. When he called her name, Jennifer turned towards me, and my face went pale. I became stiff and tense, feeling as if I was seeing a ghost. My first inclination was to run. I wasn't sure if I could stay to face the past that was about to be exposed. Jennifer was like a mini version of her mother, one of a set of identical triplets. The last time I had seen her was the morning I caught her mother and my brother in her master bedroom. I was so nervous I couldn't speak. Like her mother, Jennifer was a natural redhead with a body that exuded confidence. At 5 feet 6 inches, she was striking and had the curves that caught attention. Too much looking at her could cause any man to feel overwhelmed. When she saw me standing there, her baby blue eyes lit up with joy and tears started to flow. But it was her big smile that told me these were tears of happiness. I was on the verge of losing it. The pain, grief, and loss were staring me in the face. Seeing her as a beautiful adult made me realize just how much of my children's lives I had been forced to miss. "Oh my God! I don't believe it!" Jennifer exclaimed through her sobs, expressing her emotional joy as she rushed toward me. "You're alive. I never could accept that you were dead." The silence around us grew heavy. Everyone wore looks of shock, unsure of what to say. They had to be wondering what was happening as Jennifer rushed into my arms. Everyone was processing the moment when Stephen broke the silence, saying, "You know Charlie. His full name is Jonathan Charles Barnes III. "I know," Jennifer said between her sobs. "He's my dad. I would recognize his face anywhere." The family had always said he committed suicide due to economic problems. But I sensed something wasn't right. My Uncle James, my stepfather, always went quiet when we asked about him. That was his way of hiding the truth. I wrapped my arms around her, squeezing her tightly as she buried her face into my neck. Tears flowed from both of us. It had been 15 years since I held one of my daughters like this. At that time, she had been just 7 years old. The love I had kept hidden for so long exploded and our emotions let go. Everyone heard our sobs, knowing they expected an explanation. I took a moment to gather my thoughts while trying to calm us both down. I was banished by my family to keep their lies hidden. It was important to maintain the family's public image and honor. I was forced to sign a non-disclosure agreement and disappear. This all began when I returned home unexpectedly one day to find my brother with my wife, Jennifer's mother. I had just dropped the girls off at school and returned for my briefcase, which contained important files. I witnessed their interaction before I left, capturing it on video with my phone. When I confronted them, they laughed as if it was nothing. After showing the video to the judge, my family decided they needed to clean up the mess to protect their political careers. They believed my brother could marry my wife, which would benefit his ambitions. I said through tears that marrying a widow with 3 daughters would be an advantage for him. For over 15 years, I had been like a ghost in the family's narrative. If fate hadn't intervened, no one would have known the truth, I said sternly. In my wildest dreams, I never thought the truth would come out. The shock on everyone's faces was palpable. A few looked as if they were going to be sick. I noticed Connie looking down, trying to hide her shame and tears. She was beginning to comprehend for the first time the consequences of her own conduct through the eyes of another. Little did she realize that once the genie was let out of its bottle, nothing would ever be the same. Only those who had gone through struggle and separation could understand the hidden pain. Holding my daughter in my arms for the first time in years made me face the unintentional consequences of a family's hidden truths. At that moment, I felt ashamed, and my tears once again started to flow. For me and my daughter, our mutual healing had begun. There were only 2 things that meant anything in life, according to my grandfather. Money and power, the rest was just plain trivial. He had both. My first mistake was not going to talk to him after discovering the situation with my wife and my brother. I was emotionally distraught at that time. The judge was being considered for the Supreme Court, and a scandal would have ruined any chance he had. By the time I finished telling him what I had discovered, he had already begun scheming with his legal mind to resolve it in such a way that the events would never see the light of day. He watched the video, and to the end of his life, I had never heard him express so much frustration. His first phone call was to my wife's father, a senator from Maine. He explained to Raymond Thompson what I had caught and recorded, and I texted him the video file. Joan's father's anger made it clear he was not impressed. He said he would catch a private jet out. They both agreed that nothing would be done until the 3 of us talked it all out. Before making the next call, he turned on a program to record the conversation he was about to have. With a cold look of sternness, he called my wife. Listening to one side of the conversation, the names he used would have seemed comical if I hadn't thought of using them myself. He came down on her with the weight of a ton of bricks, making it clear that she and my brother had been acting immaturely. If this gets out, your father's career is over and so is mine. None of this would be happening, Joan, if you had learned to make better choices. James's family and the mass media will eat it up, my grandfather said. The reporters will be claiming scandal on the front page. He put his finger over his lips to signal for me to be quiet, then put the phone on speaker. He asked Joan if her 3 daughters were actually mine. She said yes. My grandfather replied, "Well, how do you know for sure? Perhaps, since you've shown yourself to be untrustworthy, we should have blood tests done to confirm." Joan became animated with anger and responded that her involvement with James did not start until 3 years ago, making it clear that there had been no others. The judge questioned, "Why should anyone believe anything you say?" She pointed out that she was on birth control because she did not want more children, suggesting that James might not have been the only one she had been with. My grandfather then asked, "Do you love James?" She said, "I have always loved him, but it has now changed. I used to love him the way a woman should love her husband, but now it's more like a sister loves her brother." Those words felt like a knife to my heart. The judge could see my pain. It was as if she had stabbed me. Joan continued, "I guess James and I are at fault for that. If I had worked as hard at the marriage as John did, this would never have happened. James saw my attraction in him before John and I married and deliberately pursued me after he moved in." She explained that they had let their attraction lead them astray, and eventually, I gave in to his constant attention with James staying with us while John was on his many business trips. Our desires drove us to where we are now. At first, it was strictly physical. We didn't realize until it was too late that we had developed feelings. By then, we didn't want it to end. We were satisfied keeping it hidden from his brother, and we didn't think through our actions. I believe it was never our intention to hurt John. We had not decided what we were going to do until John caught us. Sadly, I could tell from the sound of her voice that she felt no guilt or remorse. There was not even a hint of regret. She wasn't ashamed of being caught. My grandfather saw the tears running down my cheek. My world was crumbling. He then asked, "Do you love James?" Just to confirm. Joan said yes. After John caught us, James asked her to become his wife, and she agreed. My grandfather replied, "So James has taken away from his younger brother his wife, children, and life. What kind of man could do that to his younger brother? What kind of woman would allow that to happen? How could either of you do that to another human being? Do you think John deserves this?" Joan said, "We won't deny John is right to see the kids when our schedule allows it, because James is planning a run for political office. So whatever we end up doing, it has to be handled quietly and delicately. Publicly, James will have to become their new father, while John will be the distant uncle. As you know, the courts are still reluctant to grant sole custody to the father." My grandfather then said, "I guess the only thing I have left to say to either James or you is that once we resolve this matter, I never want to hear from either of you again. In my eyes, both James and you are dead." He slammed the phone down in anger, and I had never seen him that mad. After a long silence, he looked at me and said, "Remember the hurt, the pain, and your loss. They have made it clear that you have been written out of their lives and your children's lives. It would be better for everyone if you were dead because that's how they view you. What they dismiss means more to them than you do. Do you think they set themselves up to get caught? To my eyes, it sure looks like they did. If that's true, then that's cold. The day will come when your chance at revenge will arise. When it does, show them no mercy. Take no prisoners, but leave them ruined and alive. Remember, they always return to their past mistakes. Damn it, I would not have believed it, but she is truly conniving. She should have become a politician." With that, my grandfather drove his fist into the wall, breaking his hand. "She is truly conniving. She should have become a politician." With that, my grandfather drove his fist into the wall, breaking his hand. "Remember, Jennifer, it was never my choice. The two families decided it would be best for everyone." After listening to the phone call your mother had with the judge, Joan and James had put both sides of the family's careers and lifestyles on the line. I understood that they had to be protected. I said while still holding her in my arms, I can play that conversation for you later. It will explain a lot. But right now, we need to calm down and enjoy the rest of this special day. Jennifer lifted her head off my shoulder and kissed me tenderly on the cheek. As she separated from me, she took my hand and turned to her future husband, saying, "Stephen, my love, thank you for bringing me here. It brought my father back into my life. Dad, don't leave without talking to me. Okay?" Kissing her gently, I agreed. The barbecue was back on. After gulping down the rest of my drink, I let out a big burp, and everybody roared with laughter. I heard Jennifer comment, "Now that's the dad I know." Bill and I headed back to get a couple of cold drinks. Jennifer was always close to Stephen, but her eyes were constantly on me. "You amaze me," Bill said. "Here I am, crying in my beer last night because of my wife admitting she made some poor choices. You sat there not saying a word. Now I understand why. What you went through makes my situation feel minor. It gives me a whole new perspective on how you handled it. Are you willing to give me some advice?" I laughed and replied, "Make Connie go through marriage counseling with you. Tell her you need to understand what led her to make those choices before you can fully forgive her. Each session will reinforce the importance of understanding what happened." I noticed it when I explained why I hadn't seen Jennifer in so long. "Connie still loves you. That's why she feels so guilty. This period will allow both of you to bring closure, where healing and forgiveness can last." "Oh, I approve of your son's choice for a wife." That made us both roar, I said, as we returned to join the party. We had all pretty much cleaned up everything that Bill and Connie had prepared when Bill stood up, with Connie at his side, to get everyone's attention. Most of you don't know this, but our son Stephen graduated debt-free thanks to a private scholarship provided by our good friend and my son's future father-in-law, Charlie. Jennifer, welcome to the family. If you have half the character and wisdom your father has, my son is definitely a blessed man. Connie added, "Remember always, in your journey as man and wife, that you're only human. At times, there will be situations caused by the other that you feel can't be overcome." Bill and I thought we had reached that point, but we found some very wise advice as a result. We will be seeking outside professional help. Remember, it's easy to say I'm sorry, but it's not so easy to move on without understanding why something happened. Never let your pride get in the way of your marriage. Everyone agreed and then proposed another toast for them. Later, as I made my rounds to say goodbye, Connie came over to me, planted a kiss on my cheek, and whispered, "Thank you for getting my husband to give us a second chance. We will be seeking counseling to try to work it out. My family owes you big time." I looked around for Jennifer, but she was nowhere to be seen. So I entered the house to head to the front door when I noticed the 2 suitcases by the front door. "I hope you're not leaving without me, Dad," my daughter said. "Steve agrees with me that since we are home, I should stay with you. It will give us a chance to get to know each other again. After all, we both expect my real father to be the one that walks me down the aisle." I lost it again. It was a hoot watching her drive the old Ford home. She had never driven a Standard in her life. I just watched while mentally figuring out the cost for a new transmission because she kept using the clutch as a brake and her inexperience caused her to grind the gears. The double S-curve gravel driveway up the hill to my house blew her mind. She stalled out at least 5 times. It made me laugh, yet it was a simple memory I would treasure for the rest of my life. As soon as we got into my home, I started up the wood stove to take the evening chill off the place, then gave her a royal tour after planting her suitcases in what was now going to be her room. By the time we had finished the tour, she was in love with my log home. Each of the bedrooms was designed like they were all master bedrooms, each having their own bathrooms. The open kitchen with a pantry off to the side, the open-floor dining room and living room made the space appear huge, leaving the office, a half-bath, and stairs at the very end. We had left the office or computer room for last so I could let her play the conversation my grandfather had recorded so many years ago. After listening to it, she asked if she could get a copy, so I copied it to a stick and gave it to her. I also copied the video of them together. She noticed that the files were originally made 2 days before my reported death. I left her there crying and grieving, knowing she was experiencing a whirlwind of emotions, from love to anger. The raw truth of hearing the voice of someone you care about, proving that everything they told you was nothing but lies, had to destroy one's trust and faith. I went into the kitchen, poured us each a glass of wine, and sat on the couch facing the window, watching the village lights below when she finally came out to join me. I noticed the puffiness of her tear-swollen eyes as she sat down beside me. I took her in my arms, holding her without saying a word. The glasses were almost empty before my daughter spoke. All my life, I've been told they drew closer as they grieved your death until they realized they had fallen in love, and then they got married. It was the biggest wedding that year in the state, Jennifer said. My own mother's voice proves everything they said about it was nothing but a lie. I still have difficulty understanding the coldness of both towards you. I wonder if it was done out of hate. Mother claimed she loved you until you died, and it makes me question if anything they said to us was true. It's going to take time for you to work it out. Heck, I still don't understand at all. Even worse, there may not be an acceptable answer to why, I replied. Their marriage may not even be legal. If that comes out, James's re-election bid for the Senate will go down. I have a copy of the non-disclosure agreement I had to sign with the judge and your mother's father. It details what I had to do and why it had to be done. I will give you a copy before you leave. They took your children from you and changed our lives in ways we may never fully understand. She replied, It's like they were acting as if they were gods. The one thing I don't understand is why you let them. First of all, they manipulated me, I said. My grandfather believed until his dying day that they had it all planned. They counted on the fact that the rest of the family on both sides had too much to lose and would do anything to cover it up. Their family's own long-term conduct proved them right. So for your mother and my brother, there was no downside. As a result, they got to keep everything. My former business lost a lot of its reserved cash. My ex took the corporation public and converted my equity into shares to raise much-needed capital. It was out of sight, out of mind as far as the public was concerned. Both the judge and your mother's father transferred offshore money into a new LLC set up in my name only to help me start my life far away. I explained that Joan and James knew the family with enough money could find a way to make everything disappear. They banked on that fact, and time has proven they counted on it. So now, everything I do is managed through the LLC, which means I have no personal income to declare. This was done to make it harder for anyone to trace me. The international corporation is in a tax-free haven, and every income one draws comes from retained earnings. My computer room is where I manage the LLC and its many investments, which have done very well. I explained that my grandfather told me the day would come when the truth would come out, but I had to promise him that I would wait until it did. Only then would I be free. He said it would be the truth of what happened that would take the two of them down. Now that you know, when I walk you down the aisle, many will see my face. There's no way they can hide it. Their past will begin to unravel, becoming a very public scandal. The business here gives me the appearance of having a normal life. Our wedding is set for the 6th of August. They have already rented the hall, booked the church, and sent out the invitations. Grandfather Barnes was to walk me down the aisle, but when he hears about our conversation, he will gladly give up his spot for you. I want to have the information released the last Sunday before my wedding and have the search for your death certificate begin. I want those two to pay for what they have done. Do I have your permission to tell your father that you're alive when the conversation is finally released? Yes, you can tell my dad, although I believe you might already know that I am still alive. The answer to the second question is quite simple. Your mother and I have not gotten a divorce, I replied. I may not be legally dead, so I am not free to remarry. In my heart, I could not deliberately allow my desires to hurt another. The price I had to pay was to lead a single life. The morals, principles, and standards I have would not allow me to be like them. I told her it had finally sunk in because Jin's face showed surprise. For the first time, she saw the difference between her mother, my brother, and me. It registered in her mind that the difference was like night and day. Dad, you have been imprisoned. They stripped you of your life and your children. They made it impossible for you to have a new family. You were put in a box and forced to play their games by their rules. You are free, but it's restricted just the same. Does that make sense? Yes, it does, but it was also my mistake because I could have refused to go along, I replied. Instead, I decided to put the needs of both families first. I left her and walked back into the computer room, pulled down a huge binder from the shelves built into the wall, and returned to her. I placed the binder in front of her and told her to start looking while I refilled our glasses. Jean was amazed. It was a binder filled with all her life memories, every announcement, every public appearance, every place she was in, copies of her report cards. I had captured everything I could in her walk of life. She was surprised by how much she had forgotten. We talked into the early hours of the morning as she shared her thoughts on those memories I had never mentioned. She went to bed knowing she had always been loved by me. I told her that I had a binder just as full for each of her sisters, which I hoped one day I would be able to share with them. She stayed for 2 weeks, splitting her time between Stephen's family and me. By the time she left, we were closer than we had ever been. I felt blessed to have her back in my life. On the last Friday of July, the order went out for me to short the stock of the company I had formerly owned. Its current value was $129 a share, and I was gambling with my future. By the end of the day, I owned over 1 million shares. Jennifer's mother was the current CEO. All my original shares should be my trust for my children until they reached the age of 25, as it had been set up, but it could have been changed when I left 15 years ago. They had estimated the company's market value at about $45 a share. Bill, Connie, and I would be flying out the following Thursday via a private jet I had booked. Jennifer had kept her vow of secrecy but called me daily to keep me informed, using Stephen's phone. My stockbroker had been instructed to continue buying shares each day until the 5th of August and only sell the shares that were bought at the highest value to cover the margins needed on that market day. The conversation between the former judge and my wife hit the airwaves Sunday morning, along with the video of Joan and my brother together. An online platform crashed because the video became that hot. The media picked it up big time. By the end of the day, there was an all-out search for my death certificate or record of divorce and any related documentation concerning the settlement of my estate. Questions arose about how I was supposed to have died. Had I been murdered? It was 7 o'clock on the West Coast when my daughter called, 11 p.m. in New York. She thought the news coverage was a blast. Her mother and stepfather were in panic mode. Jennifer's sisters, Judy and Joe, had been trying to get clarification from their mother about it all, but Joan and James were refusing to answer any of their questions. One of the questions they asked was, "Is our father still alive?" Jennifer then said the second bombshell would be released overnight. Those who had read it said it appeared that I had been made to disappear with James and Joan Barnes's direction. The accounts and funds the family promised me seemed to have been sent to non-existent entities, raising suspicions that I had been set up for harm. She then said she would call my father into his office and hand him the cell. I could hear his office door close as my father said hello. I responded, "Hello, Dad." "John, is that really you?" he asked quietly. "How are you, son?" "Yes, it is. I'm good. Jean can fill you in. How is Mom? How much do you know?" I responded that we learned about the situation about a week after the news of your passing and why they felt it was necessary. We're a bit older now, but we're both doing quite well, all things considered. You'll be proud to see how well your daughters have turned out. But tell me, how did Jean figure it out? My dad asked. She found me by chance. It turns out her intended is the son of a good friend. His family hosted a barbecue to introduce her and celebrate his graduation from university. When Stephen brought me over to her, she recognized me right away, and we have been in contact ever since. I mentioned that I need to stay out of sight until the wedding, so I'm flying in Thursday night with the groom's parents and family. Do you think I can remain safely hidden if I arrange for a helicopter to drop me off at your estate? I'll make sure the landing pad has the lights on, and we will give the staff a few extra paid days off. Your mom will be thrilled to prepare some meals for us. Just let Jean know your time of arrival, my dad mentioned. After a few words, he said he wasn't going to tell my mom. He wanted it to be a complete surprise. Early Monday morning, in the European markets, according to FBN, the share values of my former company had dropped over $20 right at opening. I picked up another 1 million shares for $11 each, buying them short. That afternoon, after watching the values continue to drop, I placed a buy order for 4 million shares at $45 each, trying to get it to bottom out and sell off all the shares I currently own at $65 each. The mass media frenzy, with CNN taking the lead, was damaging to James and Joan Barnes, affecting everything associated with them, including accusations of serious misconduct. James Barnes, being a Republican, allowed CNN's Anderson Cooper to speak out passionately, taking full advantage of the situation. CNN's ratings soared, and they had a large group of reporters stationed at their front gates. Based on what the mass media had uncovered, the FBI announced an investigation into my disappearance on Thursday morning. My former corporation announced that their CEO, Joan Barnes, had accepted a buyout. Everyone knew she had been forced out as her association with the corporation was harming them. The stock share value began to stabilize at $35 a share on Friday afternoon, and the stock began to climb. However, personal problems for my brother James Barnes began to unfold. He was now facing a Senate ethics investigation, and there were hourly calls within the Senate and the media for him to resign. In his only public appearance, he reiterated that he and Joan had become seriously involved only after my reported passing, and that the conversation between the former judge and his wife must have been fabricated. The video of them together had to have been created later. CNN announced they would conduct a voice audit to verify the voices of both parties in the conversation. They uncovered a recording of James publicly stating that I had committed suicide and pointed out that, to date, no death certificate had been found. On Friday, Joan's father announced his sudden retirement from the Senate due to ongoing health issues, and his daughter's long-term conduct had contributed to his decision. The shares of my former company closed on Friday at $59. My purchase of the shares at under $45 was confirmed at dusk on Thursday night. As the helicopter began its descent, I could see my parents walking out of the back of their house to greet me. After the pilot shut down the engine, I got out from underneath the spinning blades and picked up my suitcases. Once I cleared the rotating blades, I straightened up, allowing my mother to see my face. My dad had to support her as tears and shock overwhelmed her. It had been over 15 years since I had seen them. Mom kept crying, saying, "My baby has come home." She spent the next 2 days acting like an overly protective mother while trying to spoil me as I looked so lean to her. Home-cooked meals had never tasted so good. At 5 minutes to 2 on Saturday, Jennifer stepped out of the church, signaling for me to leave the limo. As I walked up the steps toward her, a CNN reporter caught me on live camera and asked who I was. I turned and said with a straight face, "I'm the Walking Dead." Then I walked up to stand beside the bride. Jennifer looked stunning. After exchanging kisses on the cheek, we walked in arm, each of our faces showing pride. The cameraman captured it all. I caught Joan's image from behind, and wow, she still looked great as she led the bridal party down the aisle. She didn't look half bad from that angle. She had a figure that anyone would admire. Next came the ring bearers and the flower girls, who made sure to drop rose petals as they walked. Joan was next, then Judy was just ahead of us. I told Jennifer to relax, which caused Judy to look back. I raised my index finger to my mouth, signaling her to remain quiet. Judy mouthed to her sister, "You found Dad," fighting the tears that wanted to flow just before entering the main area of the church. Jennifer just nodded her head, her face shining with joy as she looked up towards Steve. I noticed that everyone had to be asking themselves where the best man was. Little did they know he was walking his bride down the aisle. I watched Joan take her seat beside a man I assumed must be James. If it was, time had really changed him. He now had the typical dad body with a bald spot on his head. Both Jennifer and I watched as Joan ascended the steps, taking her place, then turning towards us as tears started flowing. She put her hand over her mouth to hold back her emotions. It was almost as if she believed it couldn't be real. Then Judy stood beside her, holding her hand while whispering in her ear. She too joined her sister in shedding tears. I let go of my daughter and watched her climb the steps until she stood beside Stephen. "Who gives this lady away?" the father said. I replied, "Her mother and I do." Then I went and stood beside Stephen. It was a beautiful ceremony, Many would say it was the most emotional ceremony they had ever seen because the tears of joy flowed from my 3 daughters' faces. I couldn't help but notice that my daughter's mother and my brother's faces were completely pale. Neither of them could look me in the eyes during the whole ceremony, their gazes directed downwards. During the evening festivities, I was asked numerous times how I had come to be my son-in-law's best man. Had I introduced the two when we signed the form for registration for the marriage certificate? The Catholic father was shocked when I signed my formal name. Almost all the witnesses of this marriage who had known about me now knew that I was alive. Though nothing was said, I could tell that cell phones were being used all over the place. We would later learn there had been 3 live feeds. The judge and the senator, by the end of that day, had set the plans into play. Both saw the situation as a mess that would scandalize the 2 families in every way. Having served in the Marines until just after the birth of the triplets, it was decided I would be called back in. For over 3 years, I was hidden in plain sight, fighting the Taliban with brothers in arms. There wasn't a mission that I would not volunteer for. They said I had been driven. I gained a reputation for being very dedicated, but it was faulty body armor that finally did me in. As a result, I had 8 bullet scars across the front of my chest. I barely escaped with my life. After getting my discharge papers, I was a major no more. I went to the Cayman Islands to reorganize my accounts before deciding what to do with the rest of my life. The judge and my grandmother met me there at the family estate. It was my grandmother's idea that if I could not figure out what to do, I should make it a chance for discovery by throwing a dart on a map and seeing where it led. That questionable suggestion had brought me here. The congratulatory line was amusing. Judy and Joan stood on either side of me, introducing me to everyone and milking it for all it was worth. Pride was glowing from their faces, yet I did not feel comfortable in the tux. Joan and James were the last to pass through. Stephen was polite, but Joan wasn't. She appeared to be in total shock. "Mom, you should know Dad did not find me. I found him. It was me who had all the information about what you both did. Dad reluctantly allowed me copies of it so I could prove to my sisters what truly had happened. He had no clue what I was doing. What James and you did to all of us is unforgivable. I decided it had to be set straight. I had to prove he was not the failure you both made him out to be." Joan was furious. Her anger made her want to scream, but she held her tongue and walked away without saying a word to me. Joan was likely asking herself if her daughter was trying to destroy her life. James stood for a moment, looking at me before saying anything. "We need to talk. We need to work this out," he said softly, trying to figure me out. "Working on that as we speak," I replied. "But you know I was there listening via speaker when the judge and Joan talked." I responded without offering my hand. James looked at me in shock, as if he had no clue. "I will show you both as much consideration as you showed me, which we all know was none. You made your bed, now live with it," I said in a stone-cold voice. "I'll enjoy watching the fallout." We stood there watching the couple as they headed out the door. My 3 daughters saw a big smile on my face. Steve said, "Oh, something's up." I just laughed, knowing that as soon as they got off the church steps, the 2 of them would be served. Joan was being served with divorce papers on the grounds of adultery and James for alienation of affection. It would be captured by the mass media. Again, the nightmare for them was going to get a lot worse. It was time for us to get to the park for the pictures for their wedding albums. So the bridal party climbed into a big limo. On the way over, while sharing a glass of champagne, Jennifer explained everything to her 2 sisters, who were holding on to me tightly. They were surprised to learn that Jean had stayed with me for 2 weeks while she got to know her in-laws. My 3 daughters had grown up to be very beautiful ladies, and they made me proud. Jennifer explained how we had gone through all the things I had collected about her throughout the years. She said she got the impression that I knew more about her than she remembered about herself. Then she added, "He has one on each of you just as thick." "It proved to me," Jean said, "that he never stopped loving us." The only awkward moment during the photo shoot was the one with all the parents, all 5 of us. We got around it by having Connie and Bill between the rest of us, but they could not get 3 of us to smile. James and Joan were not in a good mood. Their world was collapsing fast. My identity was now out, and the mass media was having a field day. "The Walking Dead is alive," became the mass media cry. Everything they thought they knew was being rehashed like the Democratic media always did. Everything was being taken to the extreme. The bridal dinner was over the top. Then it came time for the toast. As the best man and father of the bride, I threaded it with tact. I explained honestly how, thanks to his good parents, who I considered best friends, we had developed a close bond and that I saw him as the son I never had. I went on to explain some of the comical situations we'd put ourselves in and how they had drawn us closer. I admitted that I was taken by complete surprise when he introduced me to his bride. I finished it off by saying I hoped they had the wisdom to catch on to and hold on to all their dreams. My mother's face glowed with pride when Stephen stood up. I almost lost it. He started out by saying it's rare that a groom can say that his father-in-law is his best friend. Jennifer's father paid for my post-secondary education and has advised me through a lot of rough times. It was a shock to us all that day in June when I discovered that John was Jennifer's real dad. I'll never forget my own father's words when he said I had to be a blessed man to have Jennifer becoming my wife. To both of my fathers, I want to say thank you for making me the man I am. When the bride and groom started their dance, they owned the room. To this day, I have never seen a more beautiful bride. Judy and Joan kept me on the dance floor, both wanting to share as much time with me as possible. Outside of my mother, they controlled all my time. The master of ceremonies came out on stage to announce it was time for the bride and her father to dance. Before we do that, with the bride and groom's approval, I would like to give General David Bloomberg the mic. The general stepped forward and said he was here to give 3 medals to Hard Hat Charlie. I had to laugh. Hard Hat Charlie was a major in charge of a platoon of SEALs. He said they had gone into a mission that is still classified today, only to learn upon arrival that it had been an enemy trap. Our intelligence about the situation had been totally wrong. The 2 platoons sent with them were also trapped. They were surrounded. When under review of the botched mission, it was said it was like a modern-day Custer's last stand. After 2 days of heavy fighting, with our forces near exhaustion, word came down the line to load up their bazookas to the max and pass them down the line. An average Marine can carry one of them with all their gear. Hard Hat Charlie had taken off all his clothing and gear. He had nothing on but his bulletproof vest, his helmet, boots, and his underwear. Everybody roared. Everyone around him told him he was crazy, but he said to his second in command, "Win or lose, if we don't gamble, we are all going to die. Since to all I love, I am already the walking dead. At least I will die with my boots on. I must give my men a fighting chance." He loaded up his body with 2 of these bazookas. After throwing a bunch into a clearing, he put his helmet on, stuck a cigar in his mouth, stood up, moved into a clearing and let those babies rip. His first hit was on an ammo reserve, which caused multiple explosions to spread everywhere, sending the well-hidden enemy scrambling. After firing a few more shells, he turned around and fired into pre-selected sites up the hillside. He was hit 23 times while still firing before he went down, but only 8 of them were serious. The enemy's back was broken because of his actions. They ran like the dogs they were. Each man who served with him to this day swears he alone saved all their lives. So I am here to present 2 Purple Hearts and 1 Silver Star to Major Jonathan Charles Barnes III. My only regret is that I could not do it in front of his unit. I walked up and the general pinned them on, then saluted me. My parents and 3 daughters were very proud. My daughter Jen finally led me to the floor for the father-daughter dance. She had chosen an old 60s song, and it was a very emotional dance for the 2 of us. When they announced the mother-son dance, I went over to get my mother, joining Stephen and Connie on the floor. You could see how much it meant to her. It was evident on her face. Later, the bride and groom stepped away to change into their going-away outfits. And when they returned, Jen found an envelope laying where she sat, addressed to the couple. Inside was a cashier's bank draft made out to them for $2 million, along with a note that said, "Follow your dreams." Jean saw it and started to tear up. My signature was on the draft. I slept in until almost noon on Sunday morning after finally getting to bed around 6 a.m. following the wedding reception. Judy and Joanne had taken me to a late-night Chinese restaurant for a meal. Both girls wanted some private time with their dad before we called it a night. We had exchanged phone numbers and current addresses, and my wonderful daughters had arranged to come and spend a couple of weeks with me back home. After a shave and a shower, I dressed in my usual attire: blue jeans, a white t-shirt, and a long-sleeved blue shirt left unbuttoned, hanging down the sides, paired with black socks and inexpensive running shoes. Brand names and high fashion didn't impress me much. I felt richest when dressed like this, driving my old Ford truck. I was just a simple man living a simple life. I came down the stairs to find a house full of family. Mom and Dad, Bill and Connie, and the rest of their brood, all 7 of them, and my 2 daughters. Connie was telling my daughters how I had saved their marriage and shared how for over 10 years all our friends had tried to figure out if I was straight or not. My father, though not a religious man, had the patience of a saint. He never gave any of us the hard time when we tried to set him up. We were all totally stunned when Jen called him Dad because until then, we had no clue. We thought the most important thing in his life was his 2 black female cats. After saying hello to everyone, I went to the kitchen to grab a coffee and light up a cigarette. Mom joined me asking what I wanted to eat. I told her I wanted 6 pancakes, 3 soft eggs with runny yolks, and 4 slices of bacon. She was thrilled and started pulling out her pans. The cooking staff got out of her way. They knew she was cooking for her son. Dad came in as I sat there, catching me up on what was going on. It seemed the mass media was having a field day. The headline in the New York Times was, "The Walking Dead is alive." CNN had been telling the story of my historic military record and had interviewed some of those I had served with. Most of them said they were surprised I had lived after being taken down. My dad had to laugh when one of them remarked that the one thing you never said to Charlie was that it couldn't be done because he would always find a way to do it. He seemed to enjoy getting his superiors frustrated. As a leader, he would only push his team as much as he pushed himself, and under his direction we all became better men. It turned out that Joan was married to 2 brothers, with no record of a divorce. I had to have been one of the longest publicly known individuals in a complicated situation. They said that Senator James Barnes had paid a high price when he got involved with her. Couldn't hide my smile. CNN had an afternoon special promoting that lifestyle, and feminists were cheering her on, praising her for the choices she had made. But even their comments were being criticized. A news crew had been sent to interview people in her little town, and most had nothing but good things to say. It was amazing how things escalated just for a few minutes of fame. Dad laughed and said the media had blown this up and really made a mess of it the way they mishandle things. By the time this is done, the country will think you're a saint, and you won't have even said a word. Both Joan and James are in a tough spot. I got up and refilled my coffee just before Mom brought me my plate, then sat across from me watching me eat. She was still working up to the point where she could accept that the baby of the family had come home. Dad said, "Joan mentioned that your brother is claiming he had no knowledge of what Mom said to the judge because he had gone looking for you. Do you think that might be true?" "Who knows?" I replied. "We know that for 3 years. She was involved with him behind my back. There's no way we as humans can remember everything we said or didn't say. They must have discussed the consequences of being caught and what they would do if that happened. Your mother felt secure enough to say what she did that day. She was mentally prepared for what unfolded, and her choice of words proves that. Either way, they expected the family would handle it. The 2 of them used us all." "Oh God," Joan said. "You looked at it not in a personal way, but in the way it affected everyone in the circle around them. That paints a different picture. So, who worked it all out, Mother or James?" "James has never been a leader, even in the Marines. He played it safe. Your mother and I are both go-getters willing to take risks, so it had to be her," I replied. "Jennifer told me that your gift last night, if managed properly, would set them up for life. She wouldn't tell me how much it was, but she asked me to tell you that they are investing it for 5 years because they don't want to end up in a situation where they just squander it," Joanne said softly. "Just so you know, the threads of what was done are just beginning to unravel. No one knows what will come in the end. You never know until it's revealed what people with money and power will do. On Saturday, your mother was served. It's time we got divorced, I said. Your sister is being very wise. When your sister and you get married, you will get the same amount, Joan replied. When did she receive the papers? Joan asked. The moment she left the church, James got served too. I'm suing him for alienation of affection. Either way, it's complicated. I got the family trust frozen because I am not dead. Everything in it will be dissected by the lawyers. If they put their own money in because of what was done, I may get theirs too, I said. James will have to pay a few million to settle the suit, Joan said. Joan looked at me without speaking for a moment, then said, The house they're living in is owned by the trust. I think everything is. They may be in a tough spot. It's a mess, that's for sure. I feel sorry for us all. Lawyers are going to end up taking a lot regardless. This was done to protect those who no longer need protecting. Sadly, it's always the innocent that get hurt. I noticed Judy had been listening to the conversation and seemed to have something on her mind. When she asked if she could talk to me privately, I wasn't surprised. With Dad's permission, we slipped into his office. Dad, Judy said, I've got a female friend whose ex-boyfriend has been abusive in the past. She has court orders against him, and he has been jailed a couple of times. He's set to be released again next week, and we're both afraid he's going to come after her again. She's an RN I work with, and we share an apartment. She has started an 8-week holiday and has some money in the bank. Mentally and emotionally, if it wasn't for her work, she would be a complete wreck. She needs to be in a spot where she feels safe and secure. I think she needs to get away. She was at the wedding last night, and for the first time in a long time, she showed a lot of interest in a man who she said carried himself confidently. Would it be okay if I introduced her to you? Of course it is, but you know we fly home tomorrow. So what are you really trying to get me to do? I asked. From what Joan has told us about her 2 weeks with you and how you both interacted, I want you to take her back home with you. It sounds like the perfect situation for her to be able to completely heal. Bill and Connie are great people, so I know she will fit right in, Judy said. If you won't do it for her, will you do it for me? She's that important to you, I said. So, who is the man she is interested in? Yes, she is. I see her almost like an older sister who should have been with a good man long ago. The man she is interested in is you. She laughed. With your past, I know you can keep her safe. Dad, are you trying to set me up? I laughed back. Remember, I've reached the age where I'm old enough to know better. You can answer that for yourself. She'll be here in an hour, she said with a big grin. Remember, Dad, age does not matter. The things a man will do for his daughters. Joan and I had married right after she got out of high school. Her father had introduced me to her when he was doing an overseas tour. I was in my second year of college and she was 15. For me, it was love at first sight. I joined the Marines with my father's influence and permission at 16. I took to it like a fish to water and excelled. My drill sergeant said I was mature beyond my years. Being mentally tough and determined allowed me to move up the chain faster. The only thing I found difficult was continuing my education while living in the barracks. Thankfully, schoolwork had always been easy for me. I graduated with my degree in 3 years instead of 5. I had 6 years in when the twins were born and got my first discharge when they were 2. I considered myself a young 44-year-old father. My dad always said I was an overachiever and was willing to finance my company. And away I went. Thanks to the rise of computers, in 4 years, my brokerage company expanded across North America. I was always traveling for business. I must admit that I was a bit too hands-on. Dad and I were in the backyard shooting a few hoops when Judy came out with her friend. As we watched them walk toward us, I noticed Judy's friend had long, natural blonde hair. She has a wonderful figure, just like your mom, Dad said with a chuckle. I appreciate when they're built for comfort rather than speed. I learned that Barbara Ellen Patterson was 33, had never been married, and had grown up in a small town in Ohio. She was 5 feet 9 inches, which made her 3 inches shorter than me. She had broad shoulders and could play a great game of hoops. She and my dad made quick work of Judy and me after a couple of games. The ice was broken, and we began chatting like old friends. After talking for a bit, I excused myself and went into my dad's office to make a few phone calls. I finally opened the door and called for Barbara and Judy to come in. I told Barbara that I had one of the directors of the local hospital on the line who wanted to talk to her. While she spoke with him, Judy and I went out into the hall. "What's going on, Dad?" Judy asked. I replied, "She's being offered a full-time position in the emergency department starting in a month if her references check out, which, based on what you've told me, I assume they will. If she accepts, she can catch a ride with me when I fly home tomorrow and stay with me until she finds a place. It will be up to you to help her sort out anything she can't take with her. The pay won't be as high, but the cost of living is lower." Judy hugged me and gave me a big kiss on the cheek. "Thanks, Dad. I knew you would come through. I had discussed this with Joanne, and she thought you would too. You have made it possible for her to finally put the past behind her. Thank you for helping her move forward." Barbara accepted the position, and the change that came over her was amazing. Her true, warm, and loving nature began to shine through. It was a joy for all of us to see. My dad, being a lawyer, drew up a power of attorney which would allow Judy to act on Barbara's behalf. I suggested to Barbara that she set up a new email account and share it with everyone she wanted to keep in contact with, informing them that she would send her new phone number via that account and keep them updated. Within a week, Barb, Judy, and Joanne were thrilled. They rushed out the door to help Barbara prepare to go. The plane took off at 4 o'clock and landed at port just before 8. Connie and Barbara bonded on the way, while Bill and I talked about how impressed he was with my parents and my daughters. He advised me to be careful because Barbara was the kind of person who valued commitment. The stock value of my former company was now at $13. Tomorrow morning, CNN would receive a sealed envelope containing my death certificate and the location of my grave. It was just after 9 p.m. when we arrived in SPM. I drove by the small hospital so Barbara could see where she would be working before heading back to my home. The farther we got from the East Coast, the happier Barbara seemed to be. As I drove the truck up my driveway, I realized I needed to get a second vehicle. SPM's population was now about 3,000 and was evolving into a small tourist town. Seeing my home for the first time, she said, "I haven't been in a log home since I was a small child." Before taking her luggage, we walked out to the front yard so she could get a view of how my home looked over the village below, with the log mill, the boats in the docks, and the endless view of the Pacific Ocean. It was a postcard image and she was in love with it. I told her that dusk would come between 9:30 and 10. As we entered the house, I told her she was the second person I had ever had stay in my home. Neither of us knew at that time that she would never leave. I was up before Barbara Tuesday morning. It still amazes me when I reflect on how refreshed and beautiful she looked as she walked down the stairs. It was as if she had stepped out of the clouds into sunshine. With no makeup on, she wore blue jeans and a tank top. She fit right in. "Coffee's in the air, sleepyhead," I said. "Sugar's on the counter. Half and half is in the fridge." "Good morning to you too," she replied. "Anything new in Charlie's world today?" "Let's turn on CNN and find out," I said with a smile. I flicked on the TV with the remote. As I watched her pour herself a cup and check what was in the fridge and cupboards, she noted we needed to do a major grocery shopping if she was going to do any cooking. I heard her say to herself, "It's a beautiful house, but it needs some personal touches to make it feel like home." It reminded me of something my mother would say. CNN was having a field day after receiving the death certificate. They discovered that the signature on it was from a doctor who had a questionable past and was currently serving time. A news crew had been dispatched to the site known to have been used often by organized crime. When Barbara saw me smiling, she said, "You knew." I had to admit I did. I then said, "The judge set this up long ago to protect himself. After he died, I inherited his estate in the Caymans. I realized he was going to make them pay. I had the caretaker mail this information in." She laughed and said that Judy, Joe, and she had spent most of Sunday night and Monday morning discussing everything about the situation they were in. They were all in agreement that Joan and James were getting what they deserved. "All of your daughters seem to dislike what their mother did," she said. "Your daughter made it perfectly clear that if I did anything to hurt you, I would be held accountable by her. All three of them think you're amazing. I had to promise Judy daily updates on how we were getting along. Barbara said, when I told her Saturday night what I thought about you, after the general spoke, she started to plan. I asked her why what I thought about you after the general spoke, she started to plan. I asked her why she was doing this, and she said, my dad's a good man who needs a good, honest woman in his life. After our coffee, let's drive over to Port so you can get your Washington State driver's license, apply for your nursing license, and do some major grocery shopping if that's okay. They have a Golden Corral there, so we can have an early lunch. That sounds like a plan for the day. If we can stop at the hospital so I can go to the Human Resources Department and fill out an official application. I replied, handing her my phone. I need to get our legal address saved in the memos. After stopping for coffee, before we got on the road, she asked if she could drive. I let her, and she had a smile a mile wide. She handled the clutch like she had been doing it all her life. When I said I was surprised at how well she was doing, she told me she had been driving tractors since she was 9. If you're in the country and aren't driving a standard, it's like saying you won't amount to much. After lunch, we hit the hospital and got that done, then went to the state local office where she was told her new licenses would arrive within a week. Then it was off to Walmart. The groceries we bought filled the truck. I hadn't expected the new copper non-stick pots and pans, a complete set of dishes for $12, or the new silverware. Her explanation was that my basic kitchenware showed I just didn't cook, which was true. While she was in the hospital's HR department, I called my insurance provider, so our last stop was at the local Jeep dealership where I picked up a fully loaded brand new Jeep 4x4. My insurance agent faxed over proof of insurance so we could drive it home. She drove it home, following me all the way. When we got home, she let me unload the groceries, then told me to get out of her way and leave her alone so she could properly set up the kitchen. As soon as the dish soap was unpacked, she used it to wash down every cabinet before unpacking a single thing. It was as if she was setting up a new house. I watched her in amazement as she organized the kitchen, making it her own. I should have seen the warning signs, but I was oblivious. I went into the living room and turned on the news. If it wasn't so sad, I would have laughed. They had found my grave site and were asking if I was alive or who was buried there. It would take the FBI to answer that. I heard Barbara's cell phone ring and listen in, gathering that it was Judy getting an update. I yelled, "Tell Judy you haven't assaulted me yet." Barb responded, "Your daughter says you can be a real pain." I laughed, knowing I was too old for her, and that was that. It was almost 10 before she was done. To celebrate, I poured us both a large glass of homemade blackberry wine and watched the twinkling town lights below until we went to our separate beds. I awoke to the smell of bacon being fried. When I came down, the coffee was made, and Barbara was wearing a homemade full-length house coat with a matching nightgown. I commented that it was hand-stitched and asked how long it took her to make it. She said, 2 months. "How did you know?" I replied, "Because you can't buy that quality in any store." She smiled and said, "I like a man who notices little things." Breakfast was almost ready. 6 pancakes, 3 eggs, and 4 slices of bacon for me, with warm pure maple syrup. I asked how she knew that was my favorite. She said, "Your mother told me, but you can place the eggs on your own pancake." She laughed. "So what else did my mother tell you?" I asked. She smiled, saying, "That's for me to know when you to find out." I smiled to myself. I could get used to this. I told her I was going to check in at the store and pick up the plates when I paid the taxes on the Jeep. She said that was fine because she had found the tape measure in my toolbox in the pantry and was going to measure for blinds and curtains. Before I left, she gave me a kiss on the cheek and said, "Just remember dinner is at 6 and always will be when I'm not working." Then it hit me. She was trying to make this a home, not just a place to sleep. I returned at noon and put the plates in the Jeep before heading inside. Barbara told me the good news. The FBI was digging up my grave site that very afternoon. We both wondered what they would find. It had been discovered that my death certificate had been issued the day before I had re-enlisted. CNN was carrying it live. I received a text from the lawyers asking me to call. The first part of the story ends here. The second part will be released very soon, and if it's already out, you can find the link in the description of this video.